Witch's Estate of Magic, Destiny, and Legacy. Enter the Apprentice Chapter 1. Awakening curiosity, the dawn sunlight trickled through the dense canopy of ancient trees, casting sporadic patches of gold onto Ivy Lane. The birds, usually quite vocal, seemed muted. The old streets of Hemlock Town had seen history unfold, revolutions, wars, and love stories that could move the hardest of hearts. But today, the tales whispered on cobbled streets weren't of old wars or fabled lovers. No, today's stories were tinged with a different kind of mystery. Nicholas, 16, with tousled brown hair that desperately needed a cut, trudged along, his school bag slung over one shoulder. He hummed a tune, his sneakers tapping rhythmically against the pavement. However, it wasn't school that occupied his thoughts. His eyes constantly drifted towards the enormous mansion that loomed next to his own house. Once an eyesore with its dilapidated walls and overgrown garden, the mansion at Ivy Lane had transformed in the last 6 months. It was as if life had been breathed into its very bricks. Now, the garden burst with colors, sporting flowers Nicholas had never seen. But this morning, it wasn't the resplendent garden that stole his attention. It was the silhouette of a woman. Martha. Her appearance was as enigmatic as the tales that surrounded her. With raven black hair cascading down her back and a dress that seemed like it belonged to a different era, she was a figure that could easily belong in any of the stories whispered on Ivy Lane. Nicholas watched as she meticulously tended to her plants, her fingers brushing the petals ever so softly. As if sensing his gaze, she looked up. Their eyes met. Nicholas expected to feel awkward, caught in the act of spying. Instead, a gentle warmth spread through him. Martha's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. She nodded, her gaze piercing yet kind. Nicholas returned the gesture, slightly shaken. He couldn't explain it, but that simple exchange felt charged, as if a silent understanding had passed between them. He continued walking, his pace faster than before, his heart racing for no apparent reason. Hemlock's residents, especially the younger ones, hadn't been immune to the allure of the mansion and its mysterious occupant. Martha, though reserved, was not unkind. She occasionally stepped out, frequenting the town's library or the quaint coffee shop at the corner. Yet, she remained an enigma. And in small towns like Hemlock, enigmas were a fertile ground for rumors. That evening, as Nicholas sat on his porch, he overheard Mrs. Thompson, the neighborhood gossip, talking to his mother. Never seen the garden so alive, Patricia. And the birds. Swear they sing different around her house. His mother, always the diplomat, chuckled. Maybe she just has a green thumb. Remember how Aunt Gertrude could make even a twig bloom? Mrs. Thompson huffed, her rotund figure shaking in indignation. Thumb or no thumb, there's something unnatural about that house. Old Mr. Jenkins said he saw lights. Not just any lights, mind you. Aurora borealis kind. Here. In Hemlock. In summer. Patricia laughed, brushing away the claim. Mr. Jenkins also said he was abducted by aliens in '85. Nicholas tried not to eavesdrop, but his curiosity was insatiable. Each passing day added to his list of unusual occurrences. There were the nighttime gatherings of animals, eerily synchronized and strangely purposeful. Then, the teenagers who seemed to frequent the mansion, leaving late at night, their faces serene, almost entranced. Not to forget, the fleeting mists that would often rise from the grounds, wrapping the mansion in a silvery embrace. Nicholas shook his head, trying to dispel the growing web of thoughts. He convinced himself he was being paranoid, a result of consuming one too many horror novels. Yet, that night, as Nicholas lay in bed, the soft glow from the mansion filtered through his curtains. Unable to resist, he peered out. The mansion grounds, bathed in an eerie luminance, seemed alive. The flora swayed, not to a breeze but to some silent rhythm. And in that incandescent glow, figures danced. Not wild or chaotic, but methodical and synchronized. Martha was at the forefront, her black hair billowing behind her, her hands raised to the sky as if summoning something. Around her, the teenagers moved, forming patterns Nicholas was sure had significance. He should have been scared, or at least alarmed. But instead, a profound sense of wonderment gripped him. He didn't know how long he watched, but when the first light of dawn painted the sky, the figures had vanished, and the garden was once again just a garden. The next morning was a blur. Nicholas was perpetually distracted, his mind replaying the previous night's events. He needed answers. The mansion and Martha had secrets, and he was determined to uncover them. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows on Ivy Lane, Nicholas made up his mind. He would venture into the mansion tomorrow. Little did he know that his decision would plunge him into a world where reality and myth intertwined, where every discovery would pull him deeper into the enigmatic tapestry that was Martha's world. For in Hemlock, under the canopy of age-old trees and whispered tales, magic wasn't just lore. It was very, very real. And Nicholas was about to awaken to its call. Chapter 2. Whispers in the wind. The day had been uncharacteristically warm for Hemlock, casting a stifling heat that seemed almost suffocating. As dusk approached, the warm wind brought with it not relief but a pulsating energy that sent shivers down Nicholas's spine. The day's heat had left him drained, but the impending visit to Martha's mansion had his nerves singing. Leaving his house discreetly, Nicholas decided to take the lesser-known path that wound behind the old Thompson barn and led directly to the mansion's back garden. The dirt trail, mostly shaded by overarching trees, seemed like the perfect cover for his covert mission. As he walked, the sound of crickets and the occasional owl's hoot accompanied him. Yet, there was another sound, softer, almost indiscernible. Whispers. Every gust of wind carried them, unintelligible yet insistent. Nicholas stopped, trying to discern a pattern or a message. But as soon as he focused, they seemed to recede, like waves withdrawing from the shore. Shaking off the unease, he approached the mansion's tall stone fence. Vines had interwoven themselves along the gaps in the brickwork, acting as a natural ladder. The convenience of it didn't strike him till much later. For now, he was just grateful. Scaling the fence, he landed softly in the garden, the rich aroma of flowers and freshly turned soil filling his nostrils. The mansion loomed ahead, its Gothic architecture even more intimidating up close. The windows, tall and arched, were dark, save for one on the top floor. A soft, blue glow emanated from it. Creeping closer, Nicholas found the back door ajar. His heart raced as he gently pushed it open. The inside was just as impressive as the exterior, with high vaulted ceilings, intricate woodwork, and an air of timeless elegance. But what caught his attention was the myriad of symbols and patterns that adorned almost every surface. Strange glyphs, intertwined with scenes from nature, seemed to pulse softly under his gaze. Taking a deep breath, he ventured further inside, following the hum of energy that seemed to permeate the very walls. Every so often, soft whispers returned, growing in intensity the deeper he went. It was like the mansion itself was speaking to him, guiding him. The soft blue glow from upstairs acted as a beacon. Climbing the grand staircase, he approached the door from which the light spilled. Hesitating for just a moment, he pushed it open. The room was vast, dominated by a massive round table at its center. Over it hung a chandelier with shimmering blue crystals that provided the ethereal illumination. Around the table, draped in shadow, were figures. The teenagers he'd seen before. They sat, their heads bowed, hands intertwined, forming a human chain. At the head, unmistakably, was Martha. She looked up as Nicholas entered, her piercing eyes locking onto his. He expected anger, or at least annoyance, at his intrusion. Instead, she smiled, the gesture transforming her face from stern to welcoming. "Ah, Nicholas," her voice was soft, melodic, "we've been waiting." The statement should have alarmed him. But strangely, it felt right. Like a piece of a puzzle fitting perfectly into place. She gestured for him to approach. As he did, the whispers grew louder, clearer. They weren't just random sounds. They were voices, centuries old, recounting tales of magic, love, betrayal, and redemption. Martha spoke, her voice harmonizing with the whispers. "You've always belonged here, Nicholas. Felt it, haven't you? The pull? The need to understand?" Nicholas nodded, his throat too dry to speak. "This," she spread her hands, encompassing the room and its occupants, "is the circle of hemlock. We're the guardians of ancient tales, the ones that shaped our town, our world. And you, Nicholas, are the newest link in our chain." Nicholas glanced around, recognizing faces. There was Jenny from his school, her freckled face serene. Next to her was Mike, the town's troublemaker, now looking solemn and focused. "Why me?" Nicholas finally found his voice. Martha's eyes twinkled. "Destiny doesn't pick at random, dear boy. Your bloodline has always been special. You've just been unaware." The night unfolded with tales of old, of wars fought not with weapons but with words, of spells that could change fates, and of sacrifices made for the greater good. Nicholas learned of his lineage, of ancestors who were powerful storytellers, weaving reality through their tales. As dawn approached, the circle began to disperse, each member leaving with a nod of acknowledgement to Nicholas. He was one of them now. But as he prepared to leave, Martha's words stopped him. "Remember, with knowledge comes responsibility. Protect our tales, Nicholas. There are those who would misuse them." He nodded, the weight of her words settling on his shoulders. Exiting the mansion, the world seemed different, clearer. The garden, once just a collection of plants, now whispered its own tales with every rustle of leaves. As Nicholas retraced his steps, the mansion behind him and the rising sun ahead, he knew life would never be the same. There were tales to learn, responsibilities to shoulder, and, as he'd soon discover, shadows lurking, waiting for a chance to strike. Chapter 3. Shadows and echoes. The succeeding days became a blur of discovery for Nicholas. Every evening, after sunset, he would find himself instinctively drawn to the mansion, where the circle would gather to impart knowledge and share ancient tales. The bonds between them strengthened with each passing day. Nicholas, under Martha's guidance, quickly grasped the art of weaving stories, making the eons-old tales come alive as if they were being told for the first time. However, not all was serene. As the days went by, a sense of foreboding grew in Nicholas. He would often find himself waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, heart pounding. Dreams, or more aptly, nightmares, plagued his nights. Visions of a shadowy figure, always lurking just out of sight, haunted him. The figure's eyes, cold and piercing, seemed to be always watching, waiting. One particular evening, as Nicholas walked toward the mansion, he couldn't shake off the feeling of being followed. Every rustle of the leaves, every creak of a branch seemed amplified, making him jumpy. Pausing to catch his breath, he strained his ears, trying to pick out any unnatural sound. Just as he was about to dismiss his paranoia, a soft whisper reached him. "Nicholas. ... Come to us. We've been waiting. ... Quote. The voice was neither male nor female but eerily melodic, sending chills down his spine. Panicking, Nicholas picked up his pace, the mansion now in sight. As he approached the grand entrance, the door swung open, revealing a visibly concerned Martha. She swiftly pulled him inside, her face a mask of worry. "You felt it, didn't you?" Nicholas nodded, trying to steady his breathing. "The whispers, the shadows. It's like they're closing in on me." Martha sighed, leading him to the main hall. "It's time you knew." The room was dimly lit, the only source of light being the ethereal glow from the chandelier. The circle had already gathered, their faces solemn. Jenny approached Nicholas, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "We've all faced it, the call of the shadows. It's a rite of passage." Nicholas frowned, confusion evident on his face. "But why now? Why me?" Martha took a deep breath, her gaze distant. "Every generation, the shadows choose a target, one they believe they can use to their advantage. Your power, your lineage, makes you their prime choice." Mike, who had been quiet till now, spoke up, his voice shaky. "I faced them last. It was harrowing. They tried to break me, but the circle saved me." Martha nodded, her gaze returning to Nicholas. "The shadows feed on fear, on doubt. They will try to sway you, pull you into their darkness. But remember, you're not alone." The night was spent preparing Nicholas for the impending battle. Ancient spells were recited, protective charms given, and tales of previous confrontations shared. The stories, while terrifying, also carried a message of hope, of the circle's unwavering support. As dawn approached, Nicholas felt a mix of fear and determination. He knew the shadows would come for him, but he was no longer defenseless. Days turned into nights, and the tension grew. The shadows were relentless, their whispers growing louder, their presence more suffocating. Everywhere Nicholas went, he felt watched. The once serene town of Hemlock seemed to have transformed, its beauty marred by the ever-looming darkness. One evening, as Nicholas was returning home after an intense session with the circle, he felt the atmosphere change. The air grew cold, the wind howling, carrying with it the scent of decay. The once familiar path seemed alien, trees stretching their gnarled branches like fingers reaching out to grab him. The whispers grew deafening, the shadows circling him. Frozen in fear, Nicholas tried to recall the protective spells, but his mind drew a blank. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm him, a soft glow appeared in the distance. The mansion, his sanctuary. Mustering all his strength, he sprinted toward it. But the shadows were faster, blocking his path, their formless bodies swirling around him, their cold touch burning his skin. "Join us, Nicholas," they whispered in unison. "Embrace the darkness. It's where you belong." Just as he felt himself succumbing, a bright light pierced the darkness, followed by a familiar voice. Martha, her figure illuminated by an ethereal glow, stood defiantly against the shadows, her voice strong and commanding. "Be gone. You have no power here." The shadows hissed, retreating from the light. With a final, bone-chilling scream, they disappeared, leaving behind only the cold, eerie silence of the night. Martha approached Nicholas, her face pale but determined. "They will return, stronger. We need to prepare." As they walked back to the mansion, the weight of the impending battle heavy on their shoulders, Nicholas knew that the true test was yet to come. The shadows would be back, and he would be ready. Chapter 4. The Book of Shadows. The ancient mansion, in the aftermath of the Shadows' retreat, seemed even more formidable and ominous. The stony facade was bathed in the soft light of dawn, making it appear as though it was glowing from within. Nicholas, standing at the entrance with Martha, felt a myriad of emotions: dread, determination, but above all, a burning curiosity. "What are they?" he finally asked. "Those shadows. Why are they after me?" Martha hesitated, her gaze far off. "To explain that, there's something you must see." She led him through the familiar, yet ever-changing, hallways of the mansion, every turn unveiling a new mystery. They descended a narrow stone stairwell, the air growing colder, until they reached a heavy oak door, its surface adorned with symbols that danced and shimmered. With a wave of Martha's hand, the door creaked open, revealing a room bathed in a ghostly blue glow. The walls of this underground chamber were lined with shelves containing old manuscripts, scrolls, and books, but at the center was a pedestal with an enormous, leather-bound book. Its pages, though aged, seemed alive, shifting and breathing. "This," Martha began, her voice hushed, "is the Book of Shadows. It chronicles the tales of every witch with supernatural powers, their battles, their strengths, and their vulnerabilities." Nicholas approached the book cautiously. "Is my story in here?" Martha nodded. "And that of your ancestors. Your family line has always been of interest to the shadows. The power you hold, the potential to tilt the balance between light and darkness, has always made you a target." He gingerly opened the book. The pages, though seemingly ancient, were crisp to the touch. Words formed on the page, narrating tales of valor, of witches standing against the shadows, of sacrifices made. Then, the narrative shifted, focusing on a prophecy. A prophecy that spoke of a young witch, born at the cusp of dawn and dusk, with the power to either banish the shadows forever or be their ultimate weapon. That's about me, isn't it?" Nicholas whispered, realization dawning. Martha nodded, her face grave. "The shadows want you, not to destroy you, but to use you. To twist your powers to their advantage." They spent hours in the chamber, Martha teaching Nicholas spells and incantations from the Book of Shadows. Some were for protection, while others were more offensive, meant to repel and bind the shadows. As the days passed, Nicholas grew stronger, more confident. The whispers of the shadows grew fainter, their attempts to sway him becoming more desperate. But Nicholas was no longer the unsure teenager he once was. He was becoming a formidable adversary. Late one evening, as Nicholas was practicing a particularly tricky incantation, a sudden cold gust blew through the room, extinguishing the candles. The shadows, more numerous than ever, swirled around him, their voices a cacophony of taunts and threats. "You cannot escape your destiny," they hissed. Nicholas, though afraid, stood his ground. Drawing from the lessons Martha taught him, he began chanting, his voice strong and unwavering. The room was filled with a blinding light, forcing the shadows to retreat. But not before one, bolder than the rest, lunged at Nicholas. There was a sharp pain, and then darkness. Nicholas awoke to find himself in the mansion's grand hall, the circle gathered around him, their faces etched with concern. The shadow's attack had left a mark, a shadowy, pulsating scar on his forearm. "They're growing stronger," Jenny whispered, her face pale. Mike nodded in agreement. "We need to find a way to end this, once and for all." Martha, her face determined, turned to Nicholas. "The Book of Shadows speaks of a ritual, one that can bind the shadows, rendering them powerless. But it requires a great sacrifice." Nicholas looked at her, realization dawning. "Me." Martha nodded. "The prophecy spoke of a choice. This is yours to make. But remember, the shadows will stop at nothing to get to you." The weight of his decision pressed down on Nicholas. The safety of Hemlock, of the circle, of every living being, rested on his shoulders. But he wasn't alone. The circle stood with him, united in their resolve. Together, they would face the shadows, bringing an end to the darkness that threatened to consume them all. Chapter 5. The Ritual of the Crescent Moon. Nicholas's mind raced as he stared at the pulsating scar on his forearm. The prophecy had made its intentions clear. He was the fulcrum on which the fates of many rested. The weight of that realization was stifling, the shadow's whispers now a thundering cacophony in his ears. The following days blurred into a series of intense preparations. The circle gathered daily, pooling their collective knowledge, referencing ancient texts, and consulting with entities beyond the veil to understand the ritual of the crescent moon that the Book of Shadows alluded to. Martha led the efforts, her understanding of the arcane unsurpassed. She detailed that the ritual required 3 key components: an artifact of immense power, a sacred location untouched by time, and a sacrifice willing to stand at the crossroads of destiny. The artifact was identified as the Moonstone Amulet, once possessed by the founding witch of Hemlock. Legend spoke of its luminescence, a beacon against the darkest of shadows. But its whereabouts were unknown, lost to time after the great witch trials. For the sacred location, Martha suggested the Crescent Clearing deep within the Hemlock Woods, a place where ley lines converged, amplifying any magic performed there. As for the sacrifice, all eyes turned to Nicholas. Time was of the essence. The shadows grew bolder with each passing night, their shapes and murmurs infiltrating the dreams of Hemlock's inhabitants, sowing fear and doubt. The circle, with Nicholas at its helm, split their tasks. Mike and Jenny took it upon themselves to locate the Moonstone Amulet. Their search began at Hemlock's library, poring over dusty tomes and forgotten scrolls. Their breakthrough came when they stumbled upon an old diary from the town's early settlers. It hinted at the amulet being buried with the founding witch, in a grave hidden from prying eyes to protect the powerful artifact. Armed with this knowledge, they embarked on a perilous journey through the dense woods, deciphering clues and overcoming spectral guardians who'd been entrusted with protecting the amulet. On the 3rd night, under a crescent moon, they finally stood before an ancient grave, adorned with symbols that shimmered and danced in the moonlight. With bated breath, they unearthed the Moonstone Amulet. It pulsed with an ethereal glow, attuned to the moon's phases. Meanwhile, Martha trained Nicholas in the arts of defensive and offensive magic, preparing him for the ritual. But amidst these lessons, they shared quieter moments, Martha revealing snippets of her past, of battles fought, of loved ones lost. Through these tales, Nicholas gleaned the enormity of the legacy he was to inherit. One evening, as they sat overlooking Hemlock from the mansion's highest turret, Martha, with tears in her eyes, handed Nicholas a vial containing a shimmering liquid. "It's moonshade," she whispered. "A potion made from moonflowers that bloom once every century. When the time comes, if the shadows become too overwhelming, drink this. It will shield your essence, giving you a fighting chance." The night of the ritual approached. The townsfolk, sensing the looming confrontation, gathered at the borders of Hemlock, holding vigils, their collective energies forming a protective barrier. At the Crescent Clearing, the circle, with Nicholas at its center, began the ritual. The Moonstone Amulet was placed on an ancient stone altar, its glow intensifying. Nicholas, taking a deep breath, stepped forward, the weight of his destiny pressing down on him. As the incantations began, the shadows descended like a storm, their voices a deafening roar. The circle's members chanted louder, their energies converging, funneling into Nicholas, who became a beacon of blinding light. The battle was fierce. The shadows, in their desperation, lashed out, trying to break the circle, to snuff out the light. But with each wave, Nicholas stood his ground, the teachings of Martha, the strength of the circle, and the power of the amulet fueling him. But as dawn approached, the shadows rallied for one final assault. Their numbers, though diminished, were still overwhelming. Nicholas, his energy waning, remembered the vial of moonshade. As the shadows lunged, he drank the potion, its cool essence rejuvenating him. With renewed vigor, he unleashed a wave of energy, pushing the shadows to the brink. As the first rays of dawn broke, the shadows, defeated and diminished, retreated, their whispers silenced. Exhausted, the circle rejoiced. The ritual of the crescent moon, though taxing, had been a success. The balance had been restored, the shadows banished, and Hemlock's future secured. But as the townsfolk celebrated, Nicholas, standing at the clearing's edge, gazed into the distance, the weight of his sacrifice, the enormity of his destiny, still pressing down on him. The battle may have been won, but the war, he realized, was far from over. Chapter 6. Whispers in the dark hemlock, in the days that followed, seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The once suffocating tension gave way to jubilant celebrations, as townsfolk reveled in the newfound peace. Streets that were once desolate by nightfall were now alive with children laughing and the elderly exchanging tales of old. The town had witnessed magic, sacrifice, and a victory against the shadows, and they celebrated their heroes. Yet, amid the joy, one individual was conspicuously absent, Nicholas. Following the ritual, he'd secluded himself in his home, refusing visitors, including members of the circle. Inside, the atmosphere was stifling. Dark curtains kept the sunlight at bay, and the once vibrant home felt like a mausoleum. Nicholas sat by the fireplace, the flames' dance reflecting in his distant eyes. Memories of the ritual replayed in his mind, over and over. He felt changed, as though a piece of him had been left behind at the crescent clearing. One evening, as Nicholas stared into the hearth, lost in thought, a faint whisper reached his ears. He snapped to attention, searching for the source. Was it just his imagination? Or had the shadows returned? He ventured outside, the cold wind biting at his skin. The town, though bathed in moonlight, felt different. There was an undercurrent of unease. As Nicholas walked, he noticed something peculiar. Inky, shadowy figures standing just beyond the reach of the lanterns, whispering, watching. Panicking, he raced to Martha's mansion, the one place he felt might offer answers. The mansion's grand doors opened before he could knock, revealing Martha, her face etched with worry. "I've been expecting you," she said, her voice heavy. Inside, the grand hall was awash in candlelight. Members of the circle gathered around a large table, at the center of which lay a map of Hemlock. Small black markers dotted the parchment, each signifying a reported shadow sighting. The ritual at the crescent clearing should have banished them, Martha began, her fingers tracing the markers. But something went wrong. Jenny chimed in. It's as if the ritual, instead of pushing them out, spread them thin, scattering them across Hemlock. Mike added, and they're more discreet now, blending in, whispering to the townsfolk in their dreams, stoking their deepest fears. Nicholas, feeling the weight of responsibility, spoke up, "I don't understand. I did everything right, followed every step." Martha, placing a reassuring hand on Nicholas's shoulder, replied, "This isn't on you. We're dealing with ancient forces, and even the best laid plans can go awry. We need to regroup and find a way to rid Hemlock of this menace once and for all." The following days were a flurry of activity. The circle, with Nicholas now fully involved, tried to decode the shadow's new behavior. Observations revealed that the shadowy figures were attracted to negative emotions. Anger, envy, sadness. Any strong negative feeling acted as a beacon, drawing them near. But more disturbing was the realization that these shadows weren't merely observers. They whispered suggestions, subtly manipulating the thoughts and actions of their victims, driving wedges between families and friends. One evening, as Nicholas and Martha researched ancient remedies, a frantic knock echoed through the mansion. It was Mrs. Thompson from down the lane. Her daughter, Emily, had gone missing after speaking of nightmares featuring the whispering shadows. The circle sprang into action, organizing search parties. As the night deepened, the townsfolk, lanterns in hand, combed through hemlock, calling out Emily's name. But it was Nicholas, drawn inexplicably towards the old hemlock bridge, who found her. Standing at the bridge's edge, the wind tousling her hair, was Emily, her eyes vacant, murmuring incoherent words. As Nicholas approached, he noticed shadowy figures circling her, their whispers blending into a haunting chorus. Gathering his strength, Nicholas chanted a protective incantation. The shadows recoiled but didn't dissipate. Taking Emily's hand, he whispered reassurances, gently leading her away from the edge. Back at the mansion, Martha examined Emily, confirming their worst fears. The shadows had imprinted on her, their whispers driving her to the brink. But with the circle's collective magic, they managed to sever the link, freeing Emily from the shadow's grasp. As dawn approached, the circle, exhausted but resolute, gathered around the map once more. The shadows had upped the ante, and they needed to respond in kind. "We need to find their source," Martha declared. "Only then can we hope to end this nightmare." Nicholas, his resolve strengthened by the night's events, nodded in agreement. "They tried to use me once. Now it's my turn to use that connection against them." As the first rays of sunlight pierced the horizon, casting the mansion in a golden hue, Hemlock's protectors braced themselves for the battles ahead, knowing that the shadows, though dispersed, were far from defeated. End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7. The Forgotten Chamber. As days turned into weeks, Nicholas and the Circle worked tirelessly to uncover the shadow's source. Their research led them to ancient manuscripts and tales of Hemlock's origin. Rumors spoke of a forgotten chamber, located deep beneath the town. This place, steeped in myths, was believed to be where the shadows were first birthed. Martha's mansion, with its deep history and sprawling layout, became the primary focus of their search. It wasn't just because of the peculiar events that had taken place since her arrival. Old texts frequently referenced the mansion in veiled, cryptic terms. The building, it seemed, held more secrets than its vast halls and vintage decor suggested. Nicholas found himself wandering the mansion late one evening. The walls, lined with portraits of stern ancestors and landscapes frozen in time, seemed to watch him. He had always been intuitive, and now he felt a palpable pull toward the mansion's west wing, an area Martha had said was off-limits due to renovation work. However, tonight, the boarded-up entryway seemed to beckon him. The sensation was magnetic, a gentle tugging at his very core. As he approached, the air grew colder. He pushed aside the barrier and stepped into a dim corridor. Faded wallpaper, peeling with age, and dusty chandeliers greeted him. But it was the door at the end of the hallway, inscribed with arcane symbols, that captured his attention. Unable to resist, he approached the door, his fingers tracing the symbols. As he touched them, a rush of memories, not his own, filled his mind. Rituals, sacrifices, shadows amassing in great numbers, and pain, so much pain. Reeling from the onslaught, Nicholas steadied himself and pushed the door open. Before him lay a spiraling staircase descending into the inky abyss. The Forgotten Chamber. Taking a deep breath, he began his descent. The air grew denser, the weight of centuries pressing down on him. The further he went, the more pronounced the whispers became, whispers of regret, of lost love, of betrayal. At the base of the stairs, he entered a vast chamber. The walls, covered in murals, depicted Hemlock's history, its founding, its growth, and dark rituals that seemed to feed the shadows. At the center of the room stood a pedestal holding an ornate box, pulsating with dark energy. Nicholas approached with caution. The box, intricately carved with the same symbols as the door, seemed to be the source of the shadows. As he reached out to touch it, a cacophony of voices filled the chamber, drowning out all reason. They pleaded, threatened, and seduced, trying to sway him. It was the soft, familiar voice of his mother, however, that broke through the din. "Nicholas, my love, you must not let them win. Use the light within you." With renewed determination, Nicholas channeled his energy, his inner light, and aimed it at the box. A brilliant beam cut through the darkness, targeting the heart of the shadows. The chamber shook, and a deafening scream echoed as the box cracked, releasing the shadows en masse. But instead of attacking, they seemed disoriented, fleeing in all directions. Exhausted, Nicholas collapsed. The next thing he remembered was Martha and members of the circle surrounding him, their faces etched with concern. "We felt a disturbance," Martha said, helping Nicholas to his feet. "What did you do?" Nicholas, his voice weak, replied, "I found the chamber. The box, it's their source. I tried to destroy it." Martha looked at the now inert box, her face grave. "You've weakened them, but they're not defeated. We need to act quickly, now that we have the advantage." The circle rallied the townsfolk, devising a plan to rid Hemlock of the shadows once and for all. Harnessing the combined energy of the community, they formed barriers at the town's entry points. With the shadows now scattered and weakened, they were easier to contain. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, Hemlock returned to normal. But for Nicholas, the events at the Forgotten Chamber changed him. He'd confronted the darkness and come out stronger. Martha, one evening as they sat in her library, turned to him. "You've proven yourself, Nicholas. The circle would be honored to have you as a permanent member." Nicholas smiled, realizing his purpose had been revealed in the most unexpected of ways. "I accept." Hemlock, though forever scarred by the shadows, now had a new protector, and hope shone brighter than ever. Chapter 8. The rift between worlds. After the harrowing events at the Forgotten Chamber, the mood in Hemlock was cautiously optimistic. The dark mist that once suffocated the town was lifting, and for the first time in weeks, sunlight broke through the overcast sky. The town square, which had been silent and abandoned for so long, buzzed with life. Nicholas, while relieved at the progress, couldn't shake an underlying unease. The box in the Forgotten Chamber might have been the source of the shadows, but something told him the true danger still lurked. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Nicholas was approached by Clara, a girl of his age with long raven black hair and intense blue eyes. She was one of the teenagers who had been frequenting Martha's mansion, but unlike the others, she seemed distant and reserved. "I need to speak with you," she whispered, her voice tremulous. Nicholas nodded, leading her to a quiet spot beneath an old oak tree. "I've been having dreams," Clara began, her eyes darting around as though expecting eavesdroppers. "Ever since the night at the Forgotten Chamber. Nightmares, really. But they're consistent. They're trying to tell me something." Nicholas leaned in, intrigued. "Tell me." "In my dream," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "I'm standing at the edge of a massive chasm. It's a rift, Nicholas, a tear between our world and another. From it, shadows, far more menacing than the ones we've seen, try to claw their way out. At the other end of the rift stands a figure, shrouded in darkness. I can't see its face, but it feels ancient and powerful. It's calling to me." Nicholas felt a cold chill run down his spine. "What does it want?" Clara's voice quivered. "It wants out." Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled, and a cacophony of screams erupted from the town square. Rushing to the scene, Nicholas and Clara witnessed a horrifying sight. A massive rift, eerily similar to Clara's dream, had opened in the center of the town, and from it emerged shadows, darker and more malevolent than before. The townsfolk were in a panic, running in all directions as the shadows swooped down, consuming everything in their path. The very fabric of Hemlock seemed to be disintegrating. Martha, alongside members of the circle, arrived at the scene, their faces etched with determination. They began chanting, their hands intertwined, forming a protective barrier around the rift. But the shadows were relentless, and the barrier began to weaken. "We need to close the rift," Martha yelled above the chaos. Nicholas, his mind racing, remembered the box from the forgotten chamber. Could it hold the key to sealing the rift? Without a second thought, he dashed towards the mansion. Inside, he found the box, now inert, on a pedestal. He reached out, touching it. Instantly, memories flooded back, rituals, incantations, and a particular spell designed to mend tears between worlds. But it came with a cost. Armed with new knowledge, Nicholas returned to the town square. The situation had worsened. The rift had grown larger, and Martha and the circle were struggling to hold their ground. "We need to perform the mending ritual," Nicholas shouted, making his way to Martha. "But the cost, Nicholas," Martha replied, her eyes filled with sorrow. "It requires a sacrifice." Nicholas looked around. The town he loved, the people he cared for, all were on the brink of annihilation. "We don't have a choice." Martha nodded solemnly. The two, joined by the circle, began the incantation. The shadows, sensing the threat, intensified their attack. But the townsfolk, inspired by the bravery of Nicholas and the circle, rallied. They formed barriers, protecting the group as they chanted. The ritual reached its climax, and Nicholas, holding the box, stepped forward. He felt a pull, an irresistible force dragging him towards the rift. The town, the screams, everything faded. He was in the void, face to face with the ancient entity Clara had described. It reached out, but Nicholas, using every ounce of his strength, pushed back. There was a blinding flash of light. Nicholas awoke to find himself lying in the town square. The rift was gone, the sun shining brightly. The shadows had been vanquished. Martha, tears in her eyes, helped him up. "You did it," she whispered. "But at what cost?" Nicholas looked at his hands. They were translucent, slowly fading. "Every town needs its guardian," he replied with a smile. The townsfolk gathered, celebrating their victory and mourning their loss. Hemlock, while forever changed, stood strong, its people united against the darkness. Martha, looking at the horizon, whispered, "Thank you, Nicholas." Hemlock will never forget. Chapter 9. As spirit unrested, the sky wept torrents of rain upon Hemlock in the days following the rift's closure. The town appeared to grieve for Nicholas, as did its people. They erected a statue in his honor at the town square, a young man, valiantly reaching out, as if to close an invisible rift. But while Hemlock looked peaceful under the mournful gray skies, an undercurrent of tension persisted. Whispers floated among the town's older residents. They spoke of the spectral hour, a town legend of a ghostly period between midnight and dawn when the boundary between life and death blurred. With Nicholas's sacrifice and his spirit's transition, many believed the spectral hour was imminent. One evening, as Martha, wrapped in a shawl, was tending to the flowers around her mansion, she sensed a familiar presence. The air grew colder, and the world seemed to still. "Nicholas?" she whispered, hesitantly. A gentle breeze blew, carrying with it a soft voice. "Martha, I'm trapped." She turned around and saw a translucent figure resembling Nicholas. His form shimmered, distorted by the rain, but his eyes held the same determination she remembered. "I'm stuck between realms," Nicholas's spirit explained, his voice echoing with a distant quality. "The rift may have closed, but it left a tear in the fabric of my being. I can't move on, nor can I return." Martha's eyes brimmed with tears. "There must be a way to help you, to set you free." Nicholas looked towards the mansion, where faint, ephemeral tendrils connected him to the forgotten chamber. "The box," he murmured. "It still holds power. Maybe, just maybe, it holds the key to my release." Determined, Martha led the way. The mansion's hallways echoed their footsteps, amplifying the gravity of their mission. As they approached the chamber, they felt a palpable energy, a mix of dark foreboding and the hope of salvation. Inside, the box sat innocently on its pedestal. But now, in Nicholas's spectral presence, it emanated an eerie glow. Martha, drawing upon her knowledge of ancient incantations, began to recite a spell meant to communicate with artifacts of power. The box resonated with her voice, pulsing with light. Suddenly, a shadowy vortex appeared above it, mirroring the one that had once devastated Hemlock. Nicholas, drawn to the vortex, whispered, "It's a portal. Not to the dark realm, but somewhere else. Somewhere I need to go." Martha, her voice shaking but resolute, said, "Then go, Nicholas. Find your peace." But before he could step into it, an ear-piercing scream filled the chamber. From the vortex descended a spirit, twisted in anguish, a soul that was neither of the living nor the dead. Martha recognized it immediately. "Evelyn," she whispered. Evelyn, a witch of Hemlock from centuries past, had once tried to harness the power of the box and was lost to the void. Her spirit, trapped for eons, sought release and, sensing an opportunity, had latched onto Nicholas's incomplete transition. "I won't let him go." Evelyn's spirit wailed. "He's my ticket out." Martha stood her ground. "Evelyn, you need to let go of your anger and find your own peace. Using Nicholas won't free you, it'll only bind you further." Evelyn's spirit hesitated, her form shifting between rage and sorrow. "I've been alone for so long," she wept. Martha, reaching out, said, "Then let me help you." The chamber filled with light, shadows, and voices of the past. Through a combined effort, Martha and Nicholas channeled their energies, guiding Evelyn's spirit towards the vortex. With a final scream, part anguish and part relief, Evelyn was gone. Exhausted, Martha turned to Nicholas. "Now it's your turn," she said with a teary smile. Nicholas, taking a deep, spectral breath, stepped into the vortex. Just before he vanished, he looked at Martha, gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, and then he was gone. The box dimmed, and the chamber was silent once more. Martha, alone in the quiet, felt both a weight lifted and a void left by Nicholas's departure. The town's hero had found his rest. Outside, as dawn approached, Hemlock remained asleep, unaware of the events of the night. But as the first rays of the sun broke the horizon, they illuminated a town forever changed, its history and legends intertwined with a tale of sacrifice, spirits, and redemption. Chapter 10. Whispers of the past. The town of Hemlock had seen its fair share of mysterious occurrences, but the events surrounding the mansion and Nicholas's spirit were unlike any other. Rumors circulated, each more elaborate than the last. Some spoke of ghosts and ancient curses, while others whispered about the powers that Martha wielded. Yet, amidst all the talk, one thing was clear. Hemlock was a town transformed. The unity and camaraderie that had emerged after the rift's closure now solidified. Neighbors greeted each other with newfound warmth, and children played without the earlier trepidation. But as days turned to weeks, strange occurrences began anew. Residents reported seeing fleeting shadows at the corner of their eyes, and the sounds of distant whispers echoed in the quiet of the night. Doors creaked open with no one there, and objects moved inexplicably. It was as if the spirits of old Hemlock had awoken. Rose McKinnon, a historian and native of Hemlock, decided to delve deeper into the town's past. She believed that understanding Hemlock's history might offer clues to the recent supernatural events. Opening the dusty archives in the town library, Rose came across an old diary dated from the late 1800s. It belonged to Abigail Wren, a resident of Hemlock during its early years. The entries detailed daily life, but as Rose read on, she noticed unsettling patterns. Abigail wrote of seeing shadows that weren't there, and hearing voices with no source. One entry, in particular, caught Rose's attention, October 17, 1873. The whisperings grow louder. They beckon me towards the old well in the woods. There's a story there, a history buried deep. The spirits are restless. They want to be heard. Rose's heart raced. The old well, she knew of it. It was a forgotten relic, covered in ivy and hidden deep within the forest surrounding Hemlock. Gathering a group of brave townsfolk, including Martha, Rose led an expedition to the well. They found it, just as Abigail had described, lost to time. The air around it was dense, and a palpable energy emanated from its depths. Martha, sensing the energies, whispered, "There are souls trapped here." Rose, reading aloud from Abigail's diary, recited an incantation mentioned in one of the entries. As she spoke, the ground trembled, and the well's water began to swirl. Slowly, ghostly figures emerged, spirits of Hemlock's past. They hovered around the group, their faces etched with anguish. A spirit, distinguishable from the rest with a regal bearing, stepped forward. "We are the forgotten of Hemlock," he began. "Buried secrets and untold tales. The rift's disturbance awakened us, but it is the well that holds us captive." Martha stepped closer. "How can we help you find peace?" The spirit, tears in his ethereal eyes, replied, "Listen to our stories. Remember us. We seek acknowledgement, not imprisonment." And so, the spirits began to recount their tales, of love and loss, of joy and sorrow. The town listened, captivated. With each story shared, a spirit found its peace, slowly fading into the ether. Hours passed, and as the final spirit recounted its tale, dawn broke. The well, once a prison, now stood silent, a testament to the histories of Hemlock. Rose documented each story, ensuring that the spirits' tales would be remembered for generations. A memorial was erected near the well, honoring the spirits and the town's rich history. The mysterious occurrences ceased, and Hemlock returned to its peaceful demeanor. But its residents, having witnessed the intertwining of the past and present, walked with a deeper appreciation for their town's history and the spirits that once called it home. While life went on, and children played under the watchful eyes of their elders, the stories of the spirits became an integral part of Hemlock's lore, passed down through the generations, a testament to a town that listened, remembered, and honored its past. Chapter 11. The Great Confrontation. In the aftermath of the spectral revelations at the well, Hemlock seemed to return to its peaceful days. The sunny mornings and gentle breezes that once defined the town were back, providing a stark contrast to the eerie nights of just a few weeks prior. However, the peace was deceptive. Beneath the surface, a tension was building. The stories of the spirits, while bringing solace to some, had instilled fear in others. Skeptical whispers began to circulate, suggesting that Martha was not the town's savior but its ultimate doom. A group of concerned citizens, led by the stern and determined Gregory Horn, was now convinced that Martha's witchcraft had brought these spirits into their lives. They believed that by meddling with forces beyond comprehension, Martha had disturbed a balance that should never have been tampered with. Gregory was not alone in his doubts. Even Nicholas, who had been Martha's staunchest defender, began to question the wisdom of their actions. The memories of that night at the well, the chill in the air, the stories of love and vengeance, the eyes of those who had long passed, still haunted him. As the days went on, the whispers grew louder. The town became polarized. On one side were those who believed Martha had saved them, and on the other were those who thought she was leading them to ruin. In the middle was Martha herself, seemingly unaffected by the rising discontent. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast long, eerie shadows across Hemlock's cobblestone streets, Gregory called a meeting. The old town hall, with its creaky wooden floors and towering stained glass windows, was filled to capacity. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation and anxiety. Gregory took the stage. "Folks, we're here because we care about Hemlock. We love this town, its history, and its people. But we've been led astray. The events of the past weeks are a warning. We cannot and should not meddle with forces we don't understand." Murmurs of agreement echoed through the hall. Nicholas, sitting with his younger sister Emily and mother Clara, felt torn. He remembered the horrors before Martha's arrival and the peace afterward. But the stories from the well, they were something else entirely. Suddenly, the doors at the back of the hall creaked open. All eyes turned as Martha, shrouded in a flowing black robe, entered. The room's temperature seemed to drop several degrees. With each step, the murmurs grew quieter until there was complete silence. She moved to the front, her eyes scanning the room, locking with Gregory's. "You called a meeting, Mr. Horn? And yet, I wasn't invited." Gregory, trying to maintain his composure, replied, "This is a town meeting, Miss Martha. It's for those concerned about the future of Hemlock." Martha's voice was soft but carried a weight that was palpable. "I have done nothing but help. The rift, the spirits, they were always here. I merely helped you see and understand them." A woman in the crowd shouted, "We don't need your kind of help." Martha continued, "The spirits wanted to be heard. Their stories are Hemlock's history. They sought acknowledgement and release, nothing more." Gregory, attempting to seize control, spoke up. "It's not just the spirits. Ever since you came, strange things have been happening. The animals, the mist, the children who visit you and then don't talk about what they've learned. It's all connected." Martha looked around the room. Hemlock has always been a place of magic and mystery. What you're seeing now is merely the surface being scratched. If you push me away, you push away your last hope of understanding and coexisting with these forces. Nicholas felt a sudden surge of courage. He stood up. "Martha's right. Before she came, we were being consumed by the rift. She saved us. And the stories at the well, they were unsettling, but they've made Hemlock richer. We should be embracing this, not fighting it." The room was a battleground, with lines drawn and sides chosen. And just as it seemed like the town would split apart, an unexpected sound pierced the air. A hauntingly beautiful melody, played on a flute. The sound was so enchanting that everyone in the hall stopped, transfixed. From the back of the room, an elderly woman emerged, playing the flute. It was old Agatha, the town's oldest resident and keeper of its deepest secrets. As she played, the room's tension began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of wonder. When the last note faded, Agatha spoke. "Hemlock is old, older than any of us here. And it's seen its share of joy and sorrow, love and hate. We mustn't fight. Martha has shown us a path, but it's up to us to walk it." Martha nodded, extending her hand to Gregory. Reluctantly, he took it. The great confrontation had ended not in battle but in understanding. Hemlock was united once more, its residents looking towards a future filled with promise and just a touch of magic. Chapter 12. Triumph and turmoil. The aftermath of the confrontation at the town hall resonated deeply within the community of Hemlock. As the days stretched into weeks, a renewed sense of unity enveloped the townspeople. Nicholas, inspired by the events, decided to chronicle the town's spectral history and Martha's role in it. He started by interviewing those who had interacted with her the most. One afternoon, he found himself on the edge of the mansion grounds, where the impeccable gardens thrived. As he approached the ornate front door, it opened before he could knock, revealing Martha, looking slightly weary but her eyes gleaming with that characteristic intensity. "Come in, Nicholas," she beckoned. The interior of the mansion had an old-world charm, with high ceilings, dark wood paneling, and art from different eras gracing the walls. As they settled into a sitting room bathed in the golden hue of the afternoon sun, a refreshing breeze carried the scent of blooming roses through an open window. Nicholas hesitated for a moment, collecting his thoughts. "I'm working on a book about Hemlock's history and recent events. I hope you'll help me with some insights." Martha smiled, her gaze distant. "History is often written by those who don't truly understand it. But I'll help where I can." The conversation flowed naturally, with Nicholas taking notes as Martha spoke of the rift, the spirits, and the magic she had used to help bridge the divide. She recounted tales of Hemlock from eras long gone, speaking as if she had witnessed them firsthand. As the sun began to set, casting an eerie orange glow on the room, Martha grew more introspective. "Every action has consequences, Nicholas. While I'm glad Hemlock is more united now, there are forces that have been riled up, things far older than the rift itself." Nicholas frowned, remembering the strange occurrences before the spirits' tales were shared. "What kind of forces?" Martha hesitated. "There are entities, beings that once roamed these lands before humans ever did. They've been awakened." Suddenly, a gust of wind blew in, extinguishing the candles and casting the room into darkness. The once comforting aroma of roses became suffocating. A feeling of dread took hold. Martha quickly muttered an incantation, and a soft, ethereal light illuminated the room. The wind outside grew more fierce, causing the mansion to groan in response. Nicholas felt his heart racing. "We need to strengthen Hemlock's protective barriers," Martha said, urgency in her voice. "But I'll need help." Nicholas nodded, determination burning in his eyes. "Tell me what to do." The two set out, traveling to various points in Hemlock. At each stop, Martha performed rituals, drawing energy from the ground, the air, and even the stars. Nicholas, despite his limited knowledge of magic, acted as her anchor, ensuring the energies were correctly channeled. Hours passed, and as dawn approached, they found themselves at the well, the epicenter of the rift. The wind had subsided, replaced by an oppressive silence. The ground seemed to pulse, like the beat of a gigantic heart. Martha began her incantation, her voice echoing into the abyss of the well. As she chanted, Nicholas saw figures emerge from the shadows, the spirits of Hemlock's past. They circled the well, joining in Martha's chant, their voices blending into a haunting melody. Suddenly, a powerful force erupted from the well, knocking everyone off their feet. An otherworldly scream echoed, drowning out all other sounds. Nicholas, dazed, saw a massive, shadowy figure trying to emerge from the well, its form constantly shifting, now a swirling vortex, now a monstrous face with countless eyes. The spirits, undeterred, pressed on, their ethereal forms radiating a bright light. Martha, using all her strength, shouted the final words of her incantation. A brilliant flash illuminated the area, and the shadowy entity was forced back into the well. The ground stopped pulsing. The spirits, having played their part, began to fade, their forms dispersing into the early morning mist. Martha, exhausted, slumped to the ground. Nicholas rushed to her side. "Are you okay?" She nodded weakly. "We've managed to hold them back, for now." The triumph of the night was evident, but the turmoil it had unearthed was undeniable. As the first rays of the sun broke the horizon, casting long shadows over Hemlock, it was clear that while one chapter had ended, another, even more harrowing one, was just beginning. Chapter 13. Rebuilding the bonds. The dust of the great confrontation was settling, but the uneasy sense of tension that hung in the air was palpable. The supernatural entities that once threatened Hemlock had been momentarily subdued, but the unease they left behind lingered. The townspeople began to whisper. The legends of old horrors and tales of mythical beings resurfaced, stoking fears and suspicions. Nicholas, however, was not one to sit idle amidst uncertainty. He had witnessed the indomitable spirit of Hemlock and was resolute to rekindle the town's unity. At the heart of his plan was the notion that shared stories, myths, and memories would serve as the adhesive. One sunny morning, he approached Martha with the proposal of organizing a town gathering, a day of remembrance and unity. A day where tales of Hemlock's past and present would be shared, solidifying the bond of its people. Martha, while initially hesitant, saw the merit in his proposal and lent her support. Invitations were sent, posters went up, and soon, the event was the talk of the town. Families eagerly looked forward to the gathering, children buzzed with excitement, and the elderly saw it as an opportunity to share their stories with the younger generation. The day arrived with an overcast sky. Clouds moved like rolling waves, creating an ambience of solemnity. The Central Park was chosen as the venue, a symbol of the town's resilience and beauty. Makeshift stages were erected, and stalls dotted the park's periphery, offering treats and handicrafts. As people began to assemble, a hush fell over the crowd. Nicholas, taking the stage, began with a narrative of his own experiences, culminating in the recent confrontation at the well. His words painted vivid pictures, evoking emotions that had many in tears and others nodding in shared understanding. But it was when Martha took the stage that the atmosphere shifted palpably. With an air of regality, she began recounting tales from eras gone by, of spirits and entities, of rifts and unions, of heartbreaks and triumphs. Her stories seamlessly wove the fabric of Hemlock's history, with threads of hope, despair, and undying resilience. As the evening approached, lanterns were lit, casting a warm glow on the attendees. A soft mist enveloped the park, and the cool breeze carried the strains of soft music. Local musicians played tunes that transcended generations, and soon, the park was filled with dancing silhouettes, their shadows merging and separating in a hauntingly beautiful dance. However, as the festivities continued, an unexpected chill crept into the air. A murmur of unease spread, and heads turned towards the entrance of the park where a group of hooded figures stood, their faces obscured. The music faltered, conversation ceased, and an oppressive silence prevailed. The largest of the figures stepped forward, lowering its hood to reveal an aged face, creased with lines of wisdom and time. It was Old Man Haversham, a recluse, and the guardian of Hemlock's forgotten tales. Clearing his throat, he began to speak, his voice echoing with a gravitas that commanded attention. Today, you remember and celebrate. But never forget the dangers that lurk in the shadows, the stories yet untold. One by one, the other hooded figures revealed themselves. They were the keepers of Hemlock's secrets, each guarding tales of ancient entities and primordial powers. They warned of the fragile balance that had been disturbed and spoke of rituals and sacrifices that once kept the town safe. Martha, sensing the rising panic, stepped forward, her voice firm. Thank you for your warnings, but Hemlock stands united. Together, we will rebuild the bonds that have been broken." The tension broke as townsfolk came forward, each pledging their support, vowing to stand together against any threat. The hooded keepers nodded in approval and, as mysteriously as they appeared, faded into the mist. The night ended with a strengthened sense of unity. The shared tales and warnings not only rekindled the spirit of Hemlock but fortified it. As dawn approached and the first rays of the sun illuminated the town, a new chapter began, one of hope, unity, and a resolute determination to face the challenges ahead. Chapter 14. Destiny's Child. The moon was but a slender crescent that night, casting faint silvery beams that failed to penetrate the thick blanket of fog enveloping Hemlock. Whispering breezes rustled through the trees, carrying with them the sweet fragrance of blooming flowers from Martha's garden. Martha herself was restless. Her encounters with the supernatural had bestowed upon her an innate sixth sense, an ability to feel the ebbs and flows of energy around her. Tonight, the air was thick with a premonition, a forewarning of something monumental on the horizon. Within her vast mansion, she navigated the endless corridors, arriving at a door rarely opened. Beyond it lay the Chamber of Prophecies, a room filled with ancient tomes and scrolls, gifts from witches of bygone eras. She felt drawn to a particular scroll, its edges frayed, its script faded but legible. As she unfurled it, the words seemed to dance before her eyes. It was the prophecy of the Destiny's Child. When shadows loom and darkness thrives, and Hemlock's hope barely survives, Destiny's Child will then arise, born of power, to neutralize. Martha's heart raced. She recalled the legends, tales of a chosen one, born with unparalleled powers, destined to counterbalance the forces of darkness. However, the identity of this child had always been shrouded in mystery. Deep in thought, Martha was interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Nicholas. His face, usually so composed, bore an expression of concern. "I felt something," he began hesitantly. Pull towards this room." Martha showed him the scroll. As Nicholas scanned the prophecy, realization dawned. Could it be? Is the time of the Destiny's Child upon us? Their discussion was cut short by a sudden clamor from outside. The two rushed to the window, looking out onto the streets of Hemlock. What they witnessed was surreal. An ethereal blue light emanated from the town's well, shooting up into the sky and splintering into a myriad of stars that rained down upon the town. People emerged from their homes, their faces lit in awe and wonder. But amidst the spectacle, a piercing cry rent the air, originating from a house nearby. Without exchanging words, Martha and Nicholas rushed towards the source. The cry belonged to a newborn, its voice filled with power and promise. As Martha entered the room, she met the gaze of the infant, and in those deep blue eyes, she saw galaxies, nebulae, the very universe itself. The baby's mother, Clara, looked up, her face pale and tired, yet shining with a fierce protectiveness. "He's special, isn't he?" she whispered. Martha nodded. He might be the one foretold in prophecies, the Destiny's Child. Nicholas, ever the skeptic, hesitated. But how can we be sure? Prophecies are cryptic by nature. Martha replied, there are ways to confirm. We must consult the oracle. The oracle, an ageless seer, resided in the heart of Hemlock's ancient forest. It was said she could communicate with the very threads of fate. The journey to her abode was treacherous, but the need for clarity was paramount. As the trio, Martha, Nicholas, and baby in tow, made their way through the forest, eerie shadows played tricks on their eyes. The dense foliage seemed to close in, and the silence was almost oppressive. Suddenly, the ground trembled, and a vortex of wind surrounded them. From the whirlwind emerged ethereal figures, guardians of the oracle, challenging the intruders. With a commanding voice, Martha announced their intent, and slowly, the figures dissipated, granting them passage. The oracle's dwelling was a cavern adorned with luminescent crystals, casting soft, multicolored glows. At its center sat the oracle, her eyes milky white, her form barely corporeal. "You seek answers," she intoned. Martha stepped forward, presenting the child. The oracle reached out, her fingers barely grazing the baby's forehead. A jolt of energy passed between them, and the cavern was filled with visions of Hemlock's past and possible future, a tapestry of events yet to unfold. When the vision subsided, the oracle spoke, her voice echoing through the cavern. "He is the one, the balance to the chaos. But his path is fraught with danger. Many will seek to harness his power." Martha's resolve strengthened. "We will protect him, guide him." The oracle nodded. "Guard him well, for his destiny is intertwined with that of Hemlock. In him lies the hope of us all." As they exited the forest, dawn painted the sky in hues of gold and pink. Hemlock, with its mysteries and prophecies, stood at the precipice of a new era. An era. Chapter 15. Legacy of Balance. The streets of Hemlock felt different in the aftermath of the oracle's revelation. The town, previously cloaked in a suffocating dread, now seemed on the precipice of hope and fear. The talk of Destiny's Child spread like wildfire, with many looking towards the future with cautious optimism, while others regarded the prophecy with trepidation. At the center of it all was the infant, whom Clara named Elijah. His birth had initiated a cosmic dance of fate, with powers unseen and unknown converging on Hemlock. Martha, now assuming the role of the child's protector, turned her mansion into a sanctuary. Every room was ensconced with protective wards and charms, while the perimeter of the property was bolstered with barriers to fend off any malevolent forces. Nicholas, ever the pragmatist, began researching ancient texts and scrolls, aiming to decode any hidden messages within the prophecy. "The prophecy speaks of balance," he mused, looking over an old manuscript. "It implies that with great light comes immense darkness." Martha frowned. "You think there's a counterforce to Elijah?" Nicholas nodded gravely. "Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. If Elijah embodies hope and light, there may be an entity that represents despair and darkness." Their contemplative discussion was interrupted by an unearthly howl, echoing throughout Hemlock. It was a sound neither had heard before, filled with malice and hunger. Martha rushed to the window, her eyes widening in horror. Emerging from the fog was an array of shadowy figures, their forms distorted and grotesque. Leading them was a being that seemed to be carved out of darkness itself, exuding an oppressive aura of malevolence. "They've come for him," Martha whispered, her voice laced with dread. Nicholas grabbed a staff from the wall, its tip glowing with a blue flame. "We must protect Elijah." The dark entities approached the mansion, their intent clear. As the first of them crossed the property's boundary, they were met with a barrage of protective spells that ignited them in white flames. However, the leader, seemingly unaffected, advanced with relentless determination. Inside, Clara clutched Elijah close, her eyes filled with tears. "I never wanted this for him." Martha, trying to console her while preparing for the imminent battle, replied, "Destiny chooses us, Clara. We can only rise to meet it." As the entities breached the mansion's defenses, a fierce confrontation ensued. Nicholas wielded his staff with skill, sending many of the intruders to their demise, while Martha invoked spells of protection and offense, her voice echoing with power. However, the leader of the dark forces, whom they began to call the Void, proved to be a formidable adversary. With every step, it seemed to absorb the light around it, casting an ever-expanding shadow. With the defenders on the back foot, a sudden cry pierced the air. It was Elijah. The room was bathed in a luminescent glow emanating from the infant. The intensity of the light seemed to push back the void, its form flickering and distorting. Seizing the moment, Martha chanted an incantation, summoning a vortex that began to draw in the shadowy entities. Nicholas, with a determined expression, directed his staff at the void, unleashing a beam of pure energy. The combined might of their powers, bolstered by Elijah's radiant aura, proved too much for the dark forces. With a final, defiant roar, the void was consumed by the vortex, and the immediate threat was neutralized. The aftermath of the battle saw a mansion scarred and charred, but its inhabitants unbroken. Clara, tears streaming down her face, whispered words of gratitude to Martha and Nicholas. However, the battle had confirmed Nicholas's earlier fears. The void was just the beginning, he murmured. It's a manifestation of the darkness that seeks to counterbalance Elijah's light. Martha sighed, her gaze distant. Then we prepare. Elijah's journey is just starting. We must guide and protect him, ensuring the legacy of balance is upheld. The town of Hemlock, forever a nexus of the supernatural, stood resilient. At its heart was a child, a beacon of hope. Around him, the age-old dance of light and shadow continued, setting the stage for battles yet to come. The legacy of balance was not just Elijah's burden to bear, but Hemlock's shared destiny. We hope you have enjoyed our introduction to our hedge witch Martha and her influences on a small town in the middle of nowhere, as paranormal scary story. Please visit us at Paranormal Untold Stories. Come to listen to more of our scary stories collection. Paranormal Untold Stories encourages you to contact us if you have your own untold story that you would like our professionals team to put online as a scary story. Thank you. Please follow our YouTube channel, Paranormal Untold Stories, and encourage others to do the same. Paranormal Untold Stories.